Hi, I'm Conway Daily Sun reporter Damon Steer, and I am here with Selectman Steve Porter, Planning Board Chair Ben Colbath, and Town Planner Ryan O'Connor. And we're here to do a deep dive into housing. And I think one of the #1 things that people in Conway want is a more affordable housing. And these guys are listening, and they're here to tell us what's on the ballot in terms of housing. And I thought we'd start with Article 5. Does anyone want to just kind of break down what that does for us in terms of housing? And I noticed that I think it has to be non-transient.
So that's adaptive reuse. And what that means is there's certain structures, if it was constructed prior to 1978, or if it's been vacant for 10 years, where you could put residential units and not be subject to density standards. So typically there's 1 unit for the first half acre, and then additional for each 10,000 square feet of lot area. But this is saying to encourage the redevelopment of existing structures that meet this criteria, you could fit as many units as possible in there, as long as it still works with the site. The units themselves are a certain size, and there's water and sewer, so it's not overburdening the infrastructure that already exists.
And when you say structures, do you mean like commercial buildings, or maybe an old Victorian mansion that maybe could be carved up into smaller units?
Could be, yeah. So we have a special exception that does something similar now for older structures. And this bumps up the date a bit to 1978. And that's because certain lead standards came into place during that time frame. So hopefully this could make older structures safer while adapting them to fit more residential units.
And this is in the Highway Commercial District?
Exactly, yep.
And can you just roughly say where that is?
I think we did that at the top of the interview already.
Just in case people watch this video
first.
Well, the Highway Commercial District does span quite a bit of Conway, a lot of the Strip, a lot of Redstone, but there's village commercials. There's the what we consider the core commercial area. So typically, what I think of as the commercial district would be from Burger King to Artist Falls Road.
All right. Is there anything else we want to just explain about Article 5?
Anything else on adaptive reuse?
Got that pretty much covered.
Article 6, density, and how does that apply towards housing in particular?
So currently there's a special exception to allow 12 acres.
And
There's 12
just to
units
back
per,
up,
excuse me, yeah.
special exceptions are granted by the zoning board, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. And so this is speaking to residential units. Currently, you could go to the zoning board, ask for a special exception for up to 12 units per acre, 12 residential units per acre. And by special exception, I mean that there's specific criteria that you have to meet as part of that development for the zoning board to grant that permit, and then you can go forward to the planning board with a site plan application. So this changes a little bit and allows 14 units per acre, so bumps that up. 75% of those units need to be non-transient, so full-time units.
Meaning that someone has to live there full time, they can't rent it out or short term or anything like that.
Right, this can't be a vacation rental if you're taking advantage of this increased density. So this is meant to encourage more communities, more full-time residential areas.
And now, who would apply for the just a housing developer or just?
Yeah, anyone looking to put in residential units. And one of the changes, it goes from special exception to conditional use permit. So now a developer just has the one step of going to the planning board, because conditional use permits are approved by the board. So when a site plan application comes forward, they'll also bring forward the conditional use permit. It's very similar to a special exception where you have criteria to be met, like we just talked about. So they would approve that and then go forward with review of the site plan application. So it simplifies that time frame of review, and hopefully at a lesser cost to the developer.
I was going to say the developer probably doesn't have to pay as much in terms of sending an agent to the meetings and explaining it, and
Well, the time that elapses will hopefully be a lot shorter as well. Instead of having to wait through 2 meeting cycles, it's just 1 meeting cycle. And,
exactly.
And or any changes and reviews that have to be made in the meanwhile. So they might have to go before zoning twice, based off of the board's decision. And this way, hopefully, simplify that, reduce that cost of, like you said, of sending the whoever's going to speak to that, and also move the project forward in a little bit more clear manner instead of trying to navigate the 2 different boards, 2 different decisions, and all that time that would elapse.
I imagine that some of the time and the money involved in these projects can be a little bit of a hurdle. So that might really encourage people, as long as you get the word out that this is the new regulation.
Right, and especially with building season, in the North Country being shorter than most other areas too, it's important to try to, when these initiatives get going, as the economy changes pretty quick sometimes, you never know if, we see it with some of the projects that we've approved recently, that all of a sudden things have changed and developers have backed out, and now there's this approval sitting there, and part of that was because it was such a long process to get there. And if we really want these units and we can shorten that time frame and hopefully get ground broken faster, there's more of a likelihood of those coming to fruition.
Let's see, I also have Article 8. So this is standards for specific use. Tell us a little bit, this is also highway commercial.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about what this does?
Sure. So this speaks to mixed-use development and accessory dwelling units. Currently, we don't permit mixed-use development.
And just for the audience, that means maybe having a store on the bottom and an apartment on the top.
Right. Yeah, it could look like a lot of different configurations, but it's a mix of residential and commercial units together on the same property. So this spells out those standards. And then for accessory dwelling units, currently those are by special exception.
Which is granted by the zoning board.
Exactly, yeah. So when there is a second accessory dwelling unit that is sought on a property, or there's one accessory dwelling unit accessory to a duplex. So those require the special exceptions, and that first ADU is by right, so by zoning permit. The units that require the special exception, currently those require an affordability restriction. And what we're finding is that's a high bar to reach, especially for just a regular homeowner. There's certain things that need to be recorded and certain incomes that need to be met for you to rent to a specific person. So it's a complicated process, and folks aren't taking advantage of it. So this removes the affordability restrictions, still makes them long-term, so hopefully it's more accessible to homeowners.
And a lot of those standards too, speaking on affordability, those are set by the state, not the town.
Right.
So that's stuff that when you look at the broad population of the state, and just when you start to talk about incomes and averages, it's really skewed the more further north you get, and we're pretty far north when it comes to a town our size. So that's what, speaking to why it might be beneficial to remove that affordability portion, but still try to hit that same intent.
Right. Clearly, there is a need for housing in terms of worker shortages and stuff like that. But do you have any sense on how modifying these rules might impact the population of the town? It's probably really hard to say.
Yeah, it's tough. I can start with just saying that I'm pretty skeptical of anybody taking advantage of any of the benefits that we put forth, because I've been, in the time I've been on the planning board, we've tried several different ways to incentivize more residential and density in certain areas and certain homes, and I think maybe one person has taken advantage of that. Well, I think there was maybe one application that we ever heard about it, and so fingers crossed it'll help, but numbers wise, I don't know. Steve might know.
Well, I don't think there are any real numbers. The thing is if we don't try and make these changes to entice people to actually look at it, you're never going to see anything. So at least we're being positive in our thought process. It makes perfect sense to try and do this, but you can't twist somebody's arm. And you got the economy that plays a big part about it. You got high building costs, you got interest rates and all these other things, which we have no control over. But to me, if you don't make a valid effort to try and promote a developer to put housing on their projects, you're never going to solve the workforce crisis.
And in the event that this does actually become wildly popular and the pendulum swings too far in that direction, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing compared to the situation we're in now. And we'll pull the levers that we can pull and make those adjustments to try to bring it back to the other direction. You know, there is equilibrium everywhere, and we're always searching for that. But it's been hard to get to move that pendulum at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's important to note too that this change is for the highway commercial district, and that's where we have our infrastructure and our roads that can support a higher density. The standards that are in place today, those still apply in the other districts. So we're not trying to push density where it might not fit or the infrastructure doesn't exist for it to work with the existing community. So we don't want to change that landscape too drastically if this is something that people take advantage of in a big way. It's meant to fit in those areas where it works, where the community can support it.
That's a question about mixed use. I know I'm kind of skipping around a little bit, but when a big development comes along, or a new business, people say, "Oh, where's that business going to find workers?" Now, this, some of the mixed use would actually allow them, perhaps, to have like workers that live on site or anything like that.
That would be huge. We always do like to give credit to the businesses in town that do provide housing for their staffs. There are several of them, but again, it's kind of tough when we are approving a project and people always do ask us, well, who's going to work at this place? And it's like, well, that's not really a standard that we have to hold them accountable to. That's not the purview of the planning board. We're trying to speak to the development of the lot and those standards, and as far as what it may take to staff that building is not really anything that we consider. That's outside of anything the planning board would have jurisdiction over.
Yeah, and I think during the master plan process, it was noted that a high percentage of the service worker industry was commuting 50 miles to work in Conway, and that's wild. So hopefully this could try and address that if the incentive is enough for commercial developers.
And I've also heard too from business owners that every time a new restaurant opens, they lose staff. So it's it's making it harder for businesses to operate, that are in place when these new things do get approved. But like I said, it's tough to really try to find a solution to that besides doing this and then hoping someone takes advantage of it.
Article 12, transfer of development rights. This is kind of a mouthful, and it has to do with the condos over by, Market Basket.
Well, not necessarily. So in these regulations, we restrict the lot coverage that a commercial structure can have in the highway commercial district. And transfer of development rights offers an option where a credit can be purchased to increase the structural lot coverage on a property. And that credit is then used to protect the aquifer or other water resources. This chapter could be used in the future for residential density, but right now we're being careful with how we go forward with that because we really want to understand what that density looks like in different areas. And as we were talking about earlier with Mark, where's that water and sewer going? How is that expanding? What improvements do we need to make to that infrastructure, to roads, to support the higher densities? So before we make that switch and offer that density increase, we want to have a better understanding of that. So this chapter sets the groundwork to possibly use it for density in the future, but right now it's just for structural lot coverage.
But does this have anything to do with the project, the Housing Authority?
It does not.
It does not?
It does
Okay.
not. Yeah.
Okay, Article 13, affordable housing and inclusionary housing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And which zone, and it's in multiple zones. And we can talk about a little bit about those areas and where it would apply to.
Sure. Do you all have any?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So we have a chapter existing today that is affordable housing, and I don't believe anyone's taken advantage of that chapter yet. And so that offers density incentives when someone has a certain percentage of affordable units on a property. But with the cost of construction, it's just not feasible for those projects to be constructed. Oftentimes they use state or federal dollars, and they're very limited on what projects get selected. What's the one off commercial there? Not commercial. Trying to think of the affordable housing development that came in.
Continuum?
Vesta.
Avesta, yeah, Avesta is a good example of that.
Council Way.
Council, yes. They used state dollars and competed for that to make that project happen. It's extremely competitive, and not everyone can take advantage of those incentives. So we've modified the chapter in many ways to try and make it more accessible for affordable housing developers like Avesta, but also there's a bunch of things in here for more traditional developers, so they can have a lower cost development when there's things like non-transient. So it's not just restricted by affordability, but also for long term. So right now, let's say our driveway limitation is 200 feet. This, when it creates a non-transient community, could go up to 800 feet. And that cost of building a road to the road standards, something that the town would accept, is extremely high. This offers a way to build a road that would support emergency vehicles that that neighborhood would then maintain in the future, but at a much lower cost to a developer, to hopefully build more naturally occurring attainable housing.
All right, and boy, I just had a thought on that. I'll have to come back to it.
What was your thought? Do you want to?
No, I was just trying to remember. I just kind of lost my train of thought there. The lighting precinct overlay. The planning board. This is not a planning board article. This is a petition article, but the planning board opposes it. Ben, do you want to talk, or Steve, you want to talk about?
Well, I'm sure we both can speak to that. I'll start because I think this one was a little perplexing to me because we held a public hearing at the planning board like we usually do, and no one came to speak for it. So out of respect for whoever wrote it and time that was put into it and getting the signatures, we put it to another meeting to hopefully get someone to come in and speak to it. And again, nobody came in and spoke to it. And I don't really know who the one who set this petition forth was. It was a little frustrating that they couldn't take the time to come in and speak to it. But I do think that in general, a lot of what happens, a lot of what the restrictions are in the KLP kind of run contradictory to a lot of what we learned during the master plan process. And I've heard from some individuals up there who've tried to build a home, what headache it was. And, I'm with all the housing we've been talking about, I hate hearing that just to build a single family home for a guy who was born and raised here was a headache in a time where we're just trying to do anything we can to build more homes for people here or incentivize the building of homes for people here. I just couldn't, in good conscience, vote to support that. I'm not trying to take away their quality of living or their right. I don't live up that way. I live on Birch Hill. Our density is pretty thick in there, and I think we have great quality of living that way too. So.
Well, and again, you look at the petitioned article, you're asking us to go against everything we stand for. We're going to adopt something that doesn't follow the town of Conway's zoning ordinance. And to me, in a simple term, that's called spot zoning, which in my opinion is very illegal. How can we zone this one way and then we'll go to another part of town and zone it differently? That's where I had a problem with that. Obviously, we don't have to really discuss it. It's a moot point right now,
Right.
because Kearsarge Lighting Precinct overwhelmingly supported their precinct, and I'm happy for them. And, good for them on that. But for the town, for us to do that, we're being hypocrites if we adopted something like that.
And just for the viewer who might be from a different part of Conway, the Kearsarge Lighting Precinct, which is kind of between North Conway and Bartlett, had a vote, and they decided to not dissolve or remain rather than dissolving. And so, like you said, this is kind of a moot point because the KLP is continuing to zone and they're continuing to exist. So we got that squared away. Let's see. I think that might be it for you guys.
Yeah, I think the only other ones are the groundwater protection overlay. which is being brought forward. So that's something that's in place right now, but we've had a consultant working with us to identify what other areas should be protected as part of that. Much of the highway commercial district actually has an aquifer under it. So high groundwater, we want to make sure that the water going back into the earth is filtered and clean, so as it returns to drinking water, we're creating a good cycle so we have clean water and healthy environments for the time to come.
It did seem like some of these had to do with, you know, reducing pavement and preventing flooding, because we've seen some pretty gnarly flooding in certain areas in Conway and other parts of the state. So that's probably, you know, a decent idea to reduce your pavement.
I think the impervious surface, we've read and done a lot of work about that, and you know, read a lot of studies about how that affects the wetlands and the aquifer and wildlife and the river. I think it's a little disingenuous to say it'll do anything about flooding. I think that's a bigger problem. I don't think that's really anything.
We're trying to control the runoff and
trying
stuff.
to control some of it. Yeah, it'll hopefully help with where the water's pooling and maybe the runoff. But I certainly wouldn't want anybody voting on this thinking that they weren't going to have some of the flooding we've had in the last 2 years, because I don't think much of that has a lot to do with our zoning.
Right.
And I wanted to talk about sort of what the planning board and the planning department does, and just take a big step back. Ben, how would you describe and Steve, if you want, how would you describe the role of the planning board in town? What does it generally do?
I think primarily the first thing to know about the planning board is what we do. We have a good time. No, it's about you know, land use regulations. It's about the zoning. It's about making sure that standards are being met and followed. It's adjusting those standards as the community grows and as we get feedback from the community. It's certainly not to control who comes here, who builds here. It's not that we have an avenue to select how many restaurants we have or how many hotels we have. State of New Hampshire is pretty strict on not allowing that kind of oversight. Other states do. New Hampshire doesn't. But you know, that's why a lot of times people, you know, I'll see them complaining or I'll hear them complaining about why do we need an Ocean State job lot? It's like, I don't know if we do. Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. But it's not really our purview to say you can or can't come here. What is our purview is to say that if you are going to be here, you have to build it this way. You have to follow these standards. You have to make sure that what you're doing is safe, it works in our community, and that you're not going to create more problems. I mean,
Well, I think on the other side of things is, as much as we oversee what comes into the valley as far as site plan applications, we're also, if you paid attention over the past couple of years, the planning board has been very diligent in looking at our zoning ordinance and trying to modify it to today's standards, or what we want to see happening moving forward with the town of Conway. Because we all know what the conversation's been over the past 15, 20 years. I'm not happy with the way the town's gone. It looks like it's not the same town I grew up in. And, you know, I'll be the first to say it's not the same town I grew up in, and I'm sure Ben says the same thing, it's not the same town. So what you do is you take your common sense approach, you look at the zoning, and you use intelligence when you come up with proposals to try and make things better. And when you look at the highway commercial district and you look at the different residential areas, how can we improve this? Well, this doesn't work, so let's try something like this. If that doesn't work, let's try something like that. It's an ever-evolving evolution as to what we're doing. And that's one thing I can say about the planning board is you got a lot of bright, energetic minds that are open to fresh ideas and willing to do the work to try and make this a better community. I'm not saying we're going to roll back time and we're going to be 1978 and we have a population of 2,000 people, and you know, you can hear a pin drop in the spring and it's busy in the summer, and you know, life is go easy, and with a magic wand we're going to solve the housing crisis and we're going to pick and choose whatever businesses are here. No, we have tools that we have to use that the state allows us to do. And that's where, with this board, we're able to look at the entire picture and see, I think this is going to work better than what we've seen. Zoning does work, but it needs to be looked at more frequently than what we've done in the past. And I can honestly say that's a mistake of, my generation, and we've got the younger generation that's willing to attack it. And they have the vision to say, okay, I think this is better, and still maintain the integrity of the Mount Washington Valley.
And just for the audience who may have moved here recently or not familiar, you're an elected board. You've got
Yep.
7 members, including a selectman's representative.
Yes.
Yep.
And basically, applicants, someone looking to do something with a property, comes to the board, and the board looks at the regulations and sees whether it fits or not, where they want to build it. And you guys also propose regulations that the people vote on. Not, this isn't, you guys don't dictate anything. You guys have suggestions and ideas, and
that's another misconception that people, I think, sometimes overlook, is the fact that the hot button issue, we'll use the sign ordinance, is that the town of Conway this, the town of Conway that. The town of Conway is not a person. The town of Conway is a group of, it's a group of people living in a community, and that have all agreed upon a set of guidelines to move forward with together. And if there's a problem with those guidelines, then we get together and we say, hey, there's a problem, let's fix it. And then we hold those public hearings. A lot of what we do happens at the town staff level. When you talk about applicants coming in, and then we review it, applicants come in months and months and months ahead of time, and they have to make it through Ryan before they get to us. And so, I think that, Ryan, when he started here last year, was just a total brunette. Like, no. But the constant rhetoric of the town of Conway is doing this or allowing this or not allowing that, is that you have to remember that, like we've said, it's all voted on by the community, and it's easy to sit behind your keyboard and complain about it and accuse this nefarious town of as being a entity that's operating with such malice, but it's not really how it is. And it's a lot of the reasons why we all chose to get involved. Instead of just bitching about it, we rolled up our sleeves and put in the time. And I understand not everybody has the ability to do that, but it's pretty easy to get a hold of most of us. And I certainly do continuously encourage public comment at the planning board meetings, encourage people to come in and talk to us. We set time aside for meetings specifically to have conversations. Sometimes they go longer than they should. Sometimes we spend a little bit too much time beating up on poor Steve here, but he's a very tough guy. Without coming in and bringing those to our attention, we put time into our schedule specifically for work sessions so that we can say, oh, this thing came up and this wasn't a problem until it's a problem. Now that it's a problem, let's tackle it, instead of it just sitting out there on the sidelines. And sometimes some of that stuff comes up, becomes a problem, and then legally we can't do anything about it until after whatever court it's in is made their decision. But that was certainly a big issue with the short-term rentals, where for a long time there was lawsuits going on, and we were trying to decide what to do about them. And Tom Irving and the suggestion was made that we need to wait for the state of New Hampshire to figure out their court cases first, and then we tackle them. So sometimes maybe people say we're sitting on our hands on a project, but we're not. There's a reason why we operate the way we do, and there's no downtime at the planning department.
No.
Steve?
No, I have to agree. I think for people to fully understand the commitment that people put into their positions, whether it be a selectman, planning board, they're committed to this valley. And it's not something they take lightly. It's not one of these things where they meet for 2.5 hours and, oh, that's it for this week. No, there's a lot of research. There's a lot of time spent at town office. Discussions with other individuals, looking at the ordinances, even looking around what's happening in the valley. It's trust me, if people were getting paid for the amount of energy and work they put into this town operating budget would probably be twice what it is right now, and justifiably so. The people should be blessed and thankful that they have the passionate people holding the offices they do right now.
we got about 20 seconds left, and I want to say that if people want to vote on these things in Conway, April 8th is the day at the Highway Garage. I don't have the hours off the top of my head, but April 8th.
8 o'clock to 7 o'clock.
And if they have questions, feel free to reach out to Town Hall. Be happy to help them with the ballot.
What's the best way to reach you?
Stopping in is probably the best way.
I have a cell number. His cell phone is.
One better than me.
All right, you can see him at the grocery store.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you everybody for coming in.
Thank you,
Thank you,
David.
Damon.
you.
Thank you so much.